All right, I believe we are live. Hello, hello,
Hello,
hello
hello.
to everyone. My name is Bikram Chatterji. We have a great panel set up for you for the next hour. I'm going to introduce everybody, ask them a little question, and then we're going to get started talking about creative cooperatives and why they might be great, why they might be a little hard, and why they matter and to whom. So to start off my introductions, I'd love to introduce you to Evan Edwards. He's the CEO of Project Equity. Project Equity is a nonprofit that helps companies transition to co-ops, and companies like Maximum Fun have worked with Project Equity both from every stage of figuring out whether a co-op is right for them and to actually transitioning and negotiating with a selling owner and setting up the new bylaws for the co-op as well. Before coming to Project Equity, Evan was the executive director at the YMCA Corporation of Los Angeles and was working at a variety of startups before that. Evan, can I ask you if there's one good thing that happened at work this week that you want to talk about?
Oh, that's a great question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put in the spot.
There's a lot of great things that happened this week. I think one of them is probably uh, be in this forum with you all. So that's probably number one.
Don't steal
Mainly
mine,
because
Evan. Come
I
on.
don't have a great memory, and then it's the nearest thing to me. So
Absolutely. I also want to introduce to you all Michelle Sadler. Michelle is the director of co-op operations at Stocksy United. Stocksy is an art-forward, royalty-free stock media company, and employees and over 1,800 artists are inside of that co-op. So it's an amazing organization. And Michelle, as Stocksy, manages member communication, planning, the annual general meetings, and a lot of project management. Basically everything having to do with the co-op. And prior to that, she was in a variety of marketing roles. Michelle, is there one good thing that happened this week at work?
Lots of great things. The one first one that comes to mind is we have a weekly Slack channel that's called it's Donut Chats, and this week's topic was sharing Halloween costumes from childhood. So there are some vintage gems that are surfacing in that channel right now, and it's team based, and we have plans to take it wider to our larger membership. But it's a pretty funny place to be. So each week there's a random topic that is chosen, and we share really funny stories.
Very, very nice. I honestly hate Slack, but the only redeeming thing about it is we have like a music channel and a channel that just called Aw, which is for dogs and babies, and they are great. And finally, in terms of me introducing other folks, I want to introduce you all to Jasper Wang. Jasper is the Vice President of Revenue and Operations at Defector Media. And Defector is a website about sports and a whole lot more than sports. They also have some podcasts, including the phenomenally successful Normal Gossip and The Distraction. And Defector was founded in 2020 from the ashes of Deadspin. And prior to co-founding Defector, Jasper was at a strategy consultant at Bain and also did some stand-up. And Jasper, is there any good things that happened at work this week for you?
I had so many good things happen at work. We are a more or less fully remote company, and so we only get together twice a year with everybody, or as close to 100% as we can get as a company. And I just returned from a week in the Poconos, which is where we do our fall retreat. This year, each time we get together, we're trying to work through some important elements of the business as just one piece that we tried to talk through this time. We identified that the culture is a little bit muted when it comes to giving each other constructive feedback, which is, sort of part and parcel of being part of a cooperative is, trying to figure out how and where to give each other that feedback. And so I think we made really good progress on figuring out what that internally coherent system that is, empathetic and passionate and oriented to personal growth and a better product without, feeling like we're putting each other through the ringer or we're, walking on pins and needles waiting for that feedback to hit us. So, it's not a solved issue. It's certainly, the best Harvard Business Review minds out there don't have great systems, but we're doing our best, and it's always exciting when we tackle something new like that.
That sounds great. And yeah, I think that in the culture of co-ops is a super fascinating area, when everybody has a personal stake. It like one of the great things about it is it means that people care a lot more about how the company is doing and how everybody's contributions are helping the company succeed. But that also creates the need for feedback and a platform for that can be a lot to navigate. So that's awesome. I am Bikram Chatterji. I'm the CEO of MaxFun. I have worked here for 7 years. Before that, I think most people know what MaxFun is, but we're a podcast network that was created in 2007 and converted to a worker-owned cooperative in July of this year. And prior to being at MaxFun, I was a strategy consultant as well, and I briefly worked in energy storage. And one thing that happened this week for me was last night I got to go to the first MaxFun live show that I've been to since the pandemic, which was fantastic. The Flophouse was in town in Los Angeles, and it was great to see the show. That's a hilarious show. I love those guys. And also it was just great to be amongst fellow fans of the podcast and be in community with some of the people who care about the stuff that we do. I don't know how it is for everybody else, but like as a company whose primary product goes over the internet, and then theoretically people enjoy it, just being in a physical space with those folks was really great. All right, we're going to start with the quote-unquote formal program of this. And to kick things off, I'd love Evan to talk a little bit about just what is a co-op. Tell us a little bit about the history and current state of like the co-op movement in the US, and also maybe talk about creative co-ops in particular and why artists might be interested in this as a corporate structure.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks for teeing that up, Bikram. A co-op is an operating structure for a business entity. Well, to the extent that MaxFun is an operating company, a business entity in that regard. There are different types of co-ops. There's marketing co-ops, there are housing co-ops, etc. But we're speaking specifically today about operating co-ops. A simple way of putting them, of describing them, is they're an entity in which broadly the workers all have voice. Typically, it's one worker, one share in the business. The business operates for the sake of the workers as a group, as opposed to any individual shareholders. Again, each worker is a shareholder. Typically, co-ops aren't sold, right? They exist in perpetuity as a particular entity. That doesn't mean that co-ops cannot be sold. A lot of that depends on the bylaws of a particular individual company. The way that we execute co-op transitions at Project Equity is we typically identify a business that's already the primary shareholder in the business, maybe that owner and there are a couple of other shareholders. We do a fair amount of diligence to assure that the business can operate successfully going forward if that owner leaves. And we structure a transaction whereby the business is purchased from the owner uh, on behalf of the workers, and the equity in the business again is then just distributed among that workforce. Uh, Operations in a co-op typically stay the same. So you have Bikram as president. You have any one of a number of folks who have their jobs, whether they be in sales or marketing or production. However, um, workers in a co-op typically can serve on the board. Individual may serve on the board, or they may vote representation to serve on that board, and we call that worker voice, right? And um, each individual co-op can make a decision about how frequently they will elect board members typically. So it's not a free-for-all. There should be some consistency. So every 3 years, for instance, folks will serve on a board. And from that perspective, the workforce has a say in governance, right? And we want to make sure that we differentiate governance from operations. Operations, again, there's still a chain of command. There's still all these sort of typical elements of an operating company. Uh, a lot of where the difference lies is in the governance. Um, at the end of the day, the co-ops, from our perspective, are uh, tremendous for workers to uh, achieve greater economic benefit over time. Typically, when we structure a co-op, uh, workers are able to benefit from patronage, which is a form of profit sharing that can be distributed at intervals that, again, is decided upon by that board, again, made up of workers or representatives of the workforce. And in co-ops, typically, because they are owned by the workers, we saw this through the pandemic, that those businesses tend to have greater resiliency. Why? Because there's decisions that are being made on behalf of the overall, by the workforce on behalf of the entity, and not by one person top down to the benefit of one person. Um, you said you wanted me to speak to the co-op movement in the U.S. currently.
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically, and this is a thing that I've been paying a lot of attention to. There are an increasing number of artist-based cooperatives. It feels like. I mean, I think, or artist and creative cooperatives. You know, we featured some of them on our blog this week as part of this week of Co-Optober. We obviously have Michelle and Jasper. Last week, there was a new co-op announced called Ghost Machine that is for writers and artists of comic books, so that those folks will collectively own that business and also own their own IP. So it really feels as though this cooperative model is taking root in creative arenas, and I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit as well, why that might be.
Yeah, I think broadly, in our culture, there is still reverence for the hero entrepreneur, right? So that person that goes out and raises some capital and starts up something, and more often than not, we know that those businesses tend to fail. I do believe there's been a generational shift, right, whereby um, uh, folks between the ages of 25 and 40 um, have a bit more of a democratic view of the way the workplace should operate. And I think that underpins some of what we see in terms of the growth in cooperatives and employee ownership more broadly. Project Equity are advocates for and supports the transition to more than just co-op forms of employee ownership. I think that there is particularly creative spaces, um, whether they be operating companies or collectives. And I think that stems from the fact that so often in the current sort of models for the way that creativity is then produced and distributed, workers are often, or creators are often in positions where they're dependent on a larger entity first to finance development of their work, final product development of their work, and then to finance distribution. In exchange for that, workers typically have to give up ownership rights. And so I think in a co-op structure where the creators are all owners of the entity, there's more opportunity to actually hold on to rights to their creative output. And I think that given where we are, again, vis-a-vis I mentioned this greater collective spirit, I think we see more of that manifesting itself in creative fields. You know, we can see the example of the strikes in Hollywood right now as examples of creatives that have been dependent on larger entities, and were they to be in a structure that was creator owned, they have a little bit more control over both the ownership of their output as well as their financial circumstances. So I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing more currency in the creative spaces and writ large for co-ops.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we at MaxFun, we have several of our hosts who are in either the WGA or in SAG, and we were obviously very closely connected and looking at that strike and thinking about that in the context of what we're doing. All right. Well, thank you for that overview. For the next little section, I want to ask primarily Jasper and Michelle about some of their experiences at their co-op, and obviously, Evan, if there's anything that resonates or bigger picture idea that you want to draw on, just feel free to chime in. But the three sort of core questions I wanted to go over with folks today are like, one, why does a co-op make sense for your business? Second, what is the practical difference? Like, what difference does it make? And then third, should anybody care? Should anybody who does not work at your company care? Should anybody who does not work at MaxFun care that we're a co-op? And I have an opinion on that, but I think there's probably a variety of them. So we're going to start with why a co-op makes sense. And one of the things that was really interesting, and honestly, I hadn't realized, Michelle, before we spoke, that Stocksy was founded by somebody who had deep experience in stock media prior in a much more traditional business structure. And obviously Defector, coming out of Deadspin, also those folks deeply knew the business that they were going into and deeply knew that in the context of traditional investor-backed business, and both companies chose to go a different route. So I wanted to see why that decision was made. I know, Michelle, you weren't necessarily with the company when it was made, but I'm sure it is part of what you all talk about. And I also want to talk about whether there were any second thoughts along the way, or times when you think, oh, I kind of wish we didn't do it this way. Maybe we can start with you, Michelle, and then also have Jasper chime in from Defector.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll give a quick, brief history of Stocksy. So Stocksy's founders, there was a core group of them, and they were all veterans of the stock industry. And so a lot of them had come from the same stock agency. That agency had been purchased by a big stock conglomerate. And then through that purchase, the original agency, all the values, everything that the founders were standing behind, they watched the product and the artists themselves become marginalized and devalued, and all for the bottom line, for the shareholder profit. And so they stepped away from that. They recalibrated, took a step back, and sort of thought, okay, we know we have a great product. We know we have people that want to buy this product. We know we have amazing artists who create this content. How can we create a business that puts the members' rights first and keeps the value where it belongs? And so the cooperative model was just a natural fit for that. And so they look to that. The governance structure creates the accountability that we need, that makes sure that the product can't be devalued, and the royalty structure is always within the rights of the member itself. And so that's just kind of how it came to be, and it just made sense. And we're 10 years strong now, and 1,800 members strong, and it's working.
That's
and then
great.
in terms of challenges, you're always going to have challenges with any business, and uniquely in a cooperative, the way that we were originally structured in our governing documents, because of the growth that we had seen in the previous agency, and this sort of opening of the floodgates of artists, members, and all this content flooding the collection and kind of cannibalizing itself and things like that, we put a cap on the amount of members that could join our cooperative. And so our original founding documents had a cap of 1,000 contributing artists. And what happened is, after we came in, we grew, we reached that 4-year mark, and we were actually approaching that 1,000 member cap. And so we started and I had just come onto the team at this point. And so we were sort of trying to figure out, what do we do here? Can we re-engage our members to make sure that we're meeting our buyers' needs? Because that's what was happening. Our clients were needing more, and we weren't able to fulfill the amount of requests that were coming in. And so it was sort of, how do we balance, what our founding principles of keeping the co-op small with making sure we can grow and scale and be profitable and sustainable and keep the business going. And so essentially the team proposed a resolution to the community to lift the cap. And the initial resolution was actually declined by the membership. It did not pass. A lot of concerns, a lot of discussion around, what are we doing? This isn't what we agreed to. And, a lot of back and forth dialogue about just a worry about the collection itself, right? Like this unchecked growth of members and this dilution of the collection, or dilution of member earnings as a potential. So a lot of dialogue back and forth, a lot of feedback. We have contributor forums, and of course, member emails and town halls and conversations. And really what we came back with is, we rewrote the resolution, and we represented a new resolution to the community that offered a lift on the member cap, with the caveat that every year we would vote. The membership would have the opportunity to vote to freeze member growth for a period of a year. So that allowed that checks and balance and that accountability with the membership, to sort of, for us to also prove that we aren't just going to open the floodgates and let anybody in, and have really strict acceptance criteria for the membership. And so essentially that one did pass. We got over 80% of those who voted in favor of passing that resolution, with that caveat of the freeze vote. And then we did 2 years of freeze votes. And then we actually, on the 3rd year of those passing, we submitted a resolution to remove the annual freeze vote requirement and permanently keep our membership open. And that's how we are now 1,800 plus contributing members strong.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a great example of like what it means to have a constituency that has real interest, right? Like they have real interest in making sure that their own work is not being diluted, and also knowing how to serve your customers the best way, and balance those, and try to, I mean, ultimately, obviously what we're looking for is the best outcome for the company as a whole, and how that translates down to the individual members as well, and bringing people along in those journeys. I think one of the key common themes, and I know Jasper mentioned this in the questions that are up on our blog post, is just like being much more deliberate in your decision making is one of the things that is a characteristic of co-ops. Jasper, I feel like there's been a lot written about Defector's move to be a co-op, but can you tell us some more about how that came about? And what was really interesting to me was knowing that there were other options on the table in terms of investment and other things, and like how you were thinking through that process as you were making those decisions in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. So to go all the way back, Deadspin was the sports imprint under the Gawker Media larger brand of media companies. It went through, to make a long story short, went through a variety of different ownership structures, owners over in the course of the late 2010s. In 2019, they went from being owned by Univision to a small private equity fund called Great Hill Partners, which installed its own new leadership. At that point, there were immediate clashes with new leadership among all the editorial teams at Gizmodo and Jalopnik and Jezebel and any number of the other publications under that brand. But Deadspin was the one that had the most conflict with their new leadership. And in October of 2019, it ended in the entire staff quitting, and Deadspin no longer being a functioning website for some number of months. At that point, I was just a fan. I had been a longtime reader of Deadspin for, at that point, over a decade, and I was still working at Bain & Company, but I reached out to those who I thought lived in New York, where I live, and just said, hey, I'm sorry this happened, and I'd love to buy you a beer. And if you're looking to start your own company, I'm just a guy, but I'm happy to help you however I can. So the helping at the early part actually was pretty, let's call it orthodox approach to it. Are there VC funds, PE funds, rich individuals who would like to buy an equity stake and fund the development of a new company? And we did talk to an array of different investor types, and we actually had a term sheet, a pretty traditional term sheet on the table that we signed in early March of 2020. And before it could be countersigned by the investors, COVID happened, and outside investment interest dried up very quickly. And at that point, the team, 18 writers and editors who all previously worked at Deadspin, I think really just rethought how they were going to approach this. If they were not going to be getting outside money, then let's make this company exactly what we think, make it serve us best as the employees and owners of the company. And they approached me in June of 2020 with basically like a reasonably long list of not demands, but just like, this is the way the business is going to look. It's going to be a work cooperative. And you can come and be our business executive, but also we can fire you if we don't like you. And I said, sure, let's do it. Right now, I still can be fired with a 2/3 vote of the staff. And I would argue that in most situations, almost every situation, if 2/3 of your employees don't want you to be the leader anymore, then you should probably not be the leader. And so we simply formalized what is, I think, an intuitively correct position to hold. And so we announced the new company, Defector, in July of 2020 as a subscription forward business. 90+% of our revenue in the last 3 years have come from direct subscribers. We do some podcasting, a little bit of advertising, some merch, but by and large, it's supported by subscribers. And I think we will get into more essentially the conversation of, does any of this matter to the person, the people who are consuming your product? But since the beginning, we have been that. We're sort of a funky one, right? Where we sort of had we had an origin story that involved being a normal company, and then that normal company sort of imploded, and then we reemerged as a worker cooperative. And it's so interesting to listen to Michelle describe what it means to manage 1,000, now 1,800 different members of the cooperative. For us, we are structured really like a publication with largely full-time employees and a masthead of editors and writers. And we've been very deliberate about growing the company. But we have 25 people right now. Everybody is a worker and an owner. And we have many clear decision rights around, who gets to make what decisions, voting in what circumstances, what's a simple majority vote, what is a super majority vote required to make a decision. Most of our major decisions come out of different committees. We have a revenue committee, we have a HR committee, effectively, we have a PR committee, we have an events committee, and that is how a lot of decisions get made. Every single member, again, is a full-time employee and an owner in the business, and you're expected to be serving on committees and managing operations. So there's only 2 full-time business staff among those 25 people, me and one other person. Everybody else spends 90% of their time, some weeks it might be 99% of their time, just being a writer or an editor, and just, working in a way that would look very familiar to anybody who works in a newsroom or a digital media company elsewhere. But then, certainly there are weeks like this past week where it looks very, very different, where we are, going through the financial statements together as a team. We all have full transparency on each other's salaries. It does have to be very deliberate, because we want to bring as many of those 25 people along as possible. And sometimes that means we move pretty slowly. Sometimes that means we bias towards inertia, because it is sort of hard to, pick up and get everybody to feel comfortable going in a different direction. But that is the way we're structured. And it's a feature. It's not a bug. It's funny, because oftentimes I think that insulates us actually from the question of, I don't know, what are trends that people have chased? NFTs, AI, things like that. And even if I think, to be honest, if I were to propose any of those things, I might get myself in line to be fired. But it is just the case that we're not going to pivot, every 6 months to the new thing. We're just going to keep focusing on the core, the steady business. And so it all is pretty internally coherent, but not without its trade-offs.
Yeah. I'd love to start to talk, and I don't want to obviously get into stuff that you all don't want to share, because you all run businesses. But I am really interested in some of the practical ways in which decisions are different under a co-op than they might be under a pure profit maximization, shareholder-driven, investor-driven business. And, I think, Michelle, you mentioned that one of the things that was important to the founders was making sure that the values were at the core of all the decision making, and certainly that's been the case for MaxFun as well. Like I think one of the strongest things that we can do going forward, in an industry that has been just like completely flooded with investor money that has gone in and sort of really taken up a lot of the people who were our peers, is to make sure that we're continuing to live our values in our work. Are there examples of like concrete decisions that you think would have gone a different way I guess earlier you raised one, which is you would have never had a cap on the number of contributors if you were just trying to maximize the number of the revenue of the company. But is there anything else you want to talk to about that?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that if we were structured as a traditional corporation, that would be different, right? Because the goal of a corporation is to maximize value for the shareholder, non-member, right? And so when you're a member-owned cooperative, your shareholders are your members. And so it doesn't matter how much capital you want to put into the business, you don't get an extra vote or an extra say on things, right? And so because we are structured as a cooperative, we are accountable to all members, and our board of directors are members in the cooperative, and they're accountable to each of our members. And so it's that level of accountability that exists within a cooperative that you're just not going to see in a corporation. And part of that as well is the decision making is that we don't need to, we're not going to compromise the quality of the product and the website and the content that we're putting out into the world, or that our artists are creating, just because somebody doesn't like something or wants to go a different direction or wants us to start selling something else, or however it is, right? The decision makers are the people in the business working for the business. We're structured as a multi-stakeholder cooperative, which is a bit unique because we actually have 3 classes of membership. So we have a enterprise advisor class, which is 5 members, which are external to the business, and they serve on our board of directors, bringing in that external outside expertise and consultation. And then we have our worker class, which is our B class, which is 52 members. So it's every single member who works on the staff is part of that. And then we have our contributing members. And you can be part of multi-classes. You can be a contributor and a staff member, but you're still, of course, 1 member, 1 vote. But because of that, because each one of us is a member and everyone who has a piece in here, it creates something completely different, right? Your decision-making process is going to extend past the bottom line and just, primitive economics. You're going to be looking at what is going to best serve the membership as a whole and what's going to better your community. And, it's not always about, bringing in more revenue necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've been trying to figure out how to ask this question, because it's not like co-ops are not shareholder driven. It's just that co-ops are the sole shareholders are the workers, and so they are being compensated in different ways than traditional shareholders. Like a traditional, capital investment is, how do I get the most money back in the shortest amount of time? Whereas for workers, a lot of what you're thinking about is like, okay, how do I grow this business, and how do I grow the place that I'm generally spending 1/3 of my life in? Like, how do I make that the best place for me to be and for me to be long term? Like, I don't actually necessarily want to sell in 2 years. I want this to be a place maybe I retire from, or maybe I'm able to stick around for a good long time from.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to value as well, right? Like, it's not necessarily about the paycheck. It's also the value add of all the other services that co-ops provide to their members. And that comes back to the co-op principles, right? And education, mentorship, concern for community, all these incredible values and principles that we uphold that we're accountable to. So it's more than just a paycheck.
Yeah, we like to talk about quality jobs, right? And to the extent that a lot of our focus is on jobs in industries where you frequently have workers who don't have much say over what their schedule is going to be, right? Which creates issues with childcare or other parts of their life. We see the one of the true measures of value of the co-op is how much overall job quality it creates, agency as well as patronage, and again that voice, that worker voice and autonomy.
Jasper, are there any decisions you think would have gone differently if you were not a co-op?
I'll do a sort of a macro one and a quite micro one. That's top of mind for me right now. The macro one is I've said that we're 90% subscription revenue driven. There are many quarters at a time where we basically sell no sponsorships, advertising, however you want to frame it, and that is a deliberate choice. I mean, any other publication out there has to be thinking about advertising and sponsorships, just as a matter of figuring out how to do that and maximizing your returns. For us, I'm not ideologically against sponsorships. It's just it's not in my skill set. I am personally bad at that. I don't know how to hire salespeople either. I don't know how to start a sales operations piece. If we wanted to do more sales, it would make my job more difficult, and it would push me out of what I think are my strengths. At the same time, I think our writers and editors, who again make up the bulk of our employee base, like the aesthetic cleanness of running a website that does not have ads, that does not start auto playing State Farm ads every time that you go to the homepage. They had bad experiences with that previously, and they're happy that we are at a level where the revenue is enough that we don't want to be making that investment. And I'm not ideological against this. There are many circumstances I can imagine in the coming years where we do start pushing more into advertising. We make a decision about how we want to grow staff, and how you have other projects do you want to pay for. The comings and goings of the current set of employees may change such that people find advertising to be more enticing. A sponsor could come along that puts a number on the table that we just have to consider it. So there's all sorts of ways in which this could go in different direction. But I think if we were not a cooperative that is largely driven by editorial vision, we would have a lot more advertising on the site today and in the last 3 years. An example of a very micro decision. We just came through our September renewal period, meaning about half of our annual subscribers come up for renewal in September. So it's always a bit of a stressful period for us of just making sure that those subscriptions are coming in and making our appeals to make sure that people stick around for another year. And refund policy ends up being a driver of revenue, right? There's any number of people out there who just forget to cancel their subscription, and then they get some buyer's remorse the moment that they see that hit their credit card. And then you as a company have a decision about how hard are you going to drive that difficult back and forth of, are you going to give them a refund? And our legal terms and conditions are such that we don't owe you a refund. We tell you ahead of time, a month ahead of time, that we're going to charge you in 30 days. And that's what we're legally obligated to do. We're not obligated to even reply to your email. However, there's only 2 of us on the business team, and we're the people who manage the customer service inbox. And we're the people that get emails if people are upset that they got charged. And, the people who get mad, that is the psychic damage that we have to take. Right. And so if we were not a worker cooperative, if we did not just have, 25 people who are colleagues and co-owners and, at this point, very much friends, you could see the version of this that's just you got to suck it up. That's, thousands of dollars that you'd be offering in refunds, if not tens of thousands of dollars, you're offering in refunds. And that's more important. But, we have that conversation, and it's always man, I don't want to get yelled at. So when people ask for a refund, we just process the refund. And again, we talk about this very explicitly. The staff understands that. They understand that, our time is valuable, and we play a lot of different functions on the team. They care about our mental well-being. And so we're very lenient about offering refunds. And that is because, again, we're worker owned. It's just us in that inbox at the end of the day. And, I don't know that Evan exactly means it when he says job quality, but my job quality is higher because I don't have to think about that.
Yeah. I kind of feel like in my late 20s and early 30s, I had what I thought was a brilliant insight about modern corporate structure being workers trying to basically giving them an excuse to be jerks because they were serving shareholders, and then shareholders are also paying other people to be jerks on their behalf to make more money, because it's a very simple objective function: make as much money as possible. And there's an interesting thing that happens when you are the worker owners, where it's I don't want to be it's just not worth it. It's just not worth, and I am in the position to make that judgment. It's not a thing that I want to do. It's not a person I want to be. It's not how I want to conduct myself professionally. So that is empowering. But yes, I feel in a different situation, they're just no, just tighten the screws on that. Make it happen. So hey, that's a reason that your customers should care that you're a worker owner, that you're a co-op, because it means that maybe you'll be a little bit more flexible on some of the ways that will work out in their favor. But the last thing I wanted to talk with you all about is, should anybody care? Anybody who does not work at the company care that you are a co-op? And primarily, should the folks who are consuming your products care about it? Michelle, should we start again with you? Does that sound all right?
Sounds good. Well, of course, I think they absolutely should care. And I do feel, touching a little bit on what Evan talked about as well with the creative landscape and co-ops, is I do feel like we're seeing a shift within the labor force. And, with this rise of Gen Zs and millennials. And I just see that there's a general shift in social climate. And there is this sort of more appetite for people to, accountabilities in business, and for people to put their money where their mouth is. And people want to know where their money is going. And so I feel like, when people learn that Stocksy, sometimes a lot of clients come to us because our content is amazing and our artists produce just unrivaled quality content. And that's usually what brings them to us first. And then the co-op becomes a value add on top of that, especially when they learn that we pay out some of the highest royalties in the business to our members. So they can feel good knowing that the money that they're handing over and is literally putting food on the artist's table. It's a human connection that is happening with that money, that transaction. And it's just something unique that's within this space. And I think I think there's a growing appetite for it. And I hope that we're going to see more co-ops, and I hope people are going to, really start to dig in to the structures of the businesses that they are giving their money to and working with and partnering with in their own jobs, and kind of evaluating within their own employment, what does my company stand for? Who are they partnering with? Who are they, representing or sponsoring and donating money to? And I think we're starting to see a questioning, which is really powerful.
Yeah, it feels like I hear a lot more people talking about ethical consumption and how challenging it is. And that is definitely an area where I think, like, especially in the artistic fields where we understand that they are under pressure and people's livelihoods are under pressure, hopefully it matters to people that, like, I'm going to choose the company that I know treats their workers and their artists fairly. Because I think one of the things that the strikes have told us is that there are a lot of companies, and, frankly, maybe video games is the most lucrative, but second most lucrative creative industry in the country probably does not treat their artists fairly. So, Jasper, how about you? What do you think? Does the Defector reader care that there are worker owners?
I'm a little bit more ambivalent about this. I completely agree with Michelle that I think there is a increasing awareness. I mean, you talk about just the investing world, the principles of ESG. I think that does permeate into a lot of people's decision making more. Certainly, the G standing for governance. There, like, you should care about board composition at a Fortune 500 company that you might invest in, and therefore you should care about the small businesses that you support as well, and how their ownership is structured, and how they treat their employees. I think the ambivalent part of it is, and Bikram, maybe you with MaxFun feel this as well, of like, how do you be proud and make people aware of it without being too navel gazing about it, right? Because for us, it is we're sort of producing, let's call it, voice-driven media products that are about forming a parasocial relationship with your consumers. And so from that perspective, again, you want them to feel good about the writers and podcasters and other creative folks who they're building a relationship with, and feel like they're creating value for themselves at work. On the other hand, I think I think value added is the right word, as Michelle said. Of you come to us because you are getting incisive sports coverage, incisive politics and arts and culture coverage, and if every once in a while in those articles, the writer reminds you that he or she is or they are a co-owner of a small business, and a little bit tongue in cheek on that. That's great. But, I think it is probably a mistake if we are too frequently bringing that up, because at the end of the day, it's just like people come to us for a subject matter expertise that is not being a business owner, actually. And so, if I had to guess, I would say, if people could answer in a survey, put 100 points towards why you pay for Defector, and they could accurately reflect that, like, if that number is actually more than 5 or 10%, that would be very surprising. There's also lots of people in subscription businesses who pay you once and then forget about you, and then they're just paying you year after year. And so part of it's also sort of the nature of the subscription business of like, yes, ideally everyone is like feeling fully engaged and getting a maximum value out of their product, but like people fall really along a spectrum of engagement. And if there are folks out there who pay us $8 a month and they read us, a couple times a week, and they like, oh, they have great NFL coverage and they don't know that we are worker owned, I don't mind that. We will gladly count you among our audience.
And that's something we always recommend as well when we're mentoring or we're chatting with researchers or people interested about co-op. They kind of say, like, what's the advice that you would give to somebody starting a co-op? And we sort of always say, like, product first. Make sure you understand your product and you use the co-op model to leverage, as a leveraging or as a tool for building the business. But the co-op can't necessarily be your business. It's the framework in which your business operates.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to think about how navel-gazy MaxFun wants to be in the midst of our month-long celebration of co-ops and our becoming a co-op, because that is definitely a conversation we had, both leading up to this and during this time. And I think, I think what you're saying is, what we're both saying is spot on in terms of like, our shows have always been the thing that drive people to our network. And our shows have always been the most important connection we have to our audience. And, if MaxFun can do anything well, we need to do two things well, which is, find and foster really good shows and try to build community amongst that audience that is driven in by the shows. But like, those are the things. It's not fundamentally like we need to be a co-op. I think for us, the way we think about it is the co-op makes sure that we will continue to do those things in an ethical way and a sustainable way. And I don't know if that matters to folks, but like in the podcast world, it's been really interesting because I feel like a lot of shows recently have gotten canceled as a result of people, who were going into it with purely commercial interests and have pulled back from that. And so the one way that I think it can really value, like very concretely, apart from believing in the ethics of the company, that it really concretely values the audience, is they come to us because they love the shows. They know that like we love the shows too, and that's the thing that is driving our business decisions. So
I'd just like to chime in real quick. I would like for it to matter, but
yeah,
I know that it doesn't across the board amongst consumers. When we are doing an initial consultation with a business owner about either transitioning their business that they're going to stay a part of or selling it, we segment them generally to mission-driven, mission-aligned, mission-adjacent, and bottom-line focused, right? And that sort of helps us to understand, where it is they fall in terms of developing the deal structure, how we bring them along. And I'd say that consumers probably segment similarly to, the fact that a business is a co-op. They're really turned on by that. I mentioned that another of our clients in LA that I mentioned to folks that don't know that Proof Bakery is a co-op, and they're really excited to know that. And they are like, I'm going to patronize that business all that much more now because they now know it's a co-op, and there are folks that find out that it is, and they decide that they're going to go ahead and patron it. So it is it is a feature, I think, in many instances, and I also think that there's probably some geographic relevance too, as being in Los Angeles, left coast. That I think that there is probably a little bit more currency, uh, but I don't think ultimately that it is one of those things that many consumers care about. Again, if the product's not good, per Bikram's comment, then nobody's going to care that you're a co-op or not.
Yeah, yeah, I think that feels right as well. Um, I tried to reserve a little bit of time for Q&A. We only have 5 minutes, but I think maybe we can get to one of these questions from the audience. Before we do that, actually, I do want to mention Chris Edwards says that I was a Defector sub for years, and I can't praise them highly enough for how they do their business. So you got one at least who cares about the way the business is conducted. So Chris Edwards also asks, I am very curious how co-op functions in finance, which is a highly capital focused industry. Looking at IT information security space and the ability to compete with shareholder models is something I think about a lot. So I think the question is about, can a co-op function in a capital intensive industry? Maybe that's something for you, Evan.
I don't see a reason why it can't, but there are nuances to uh, uh, every business sector that may or may not make them more or less a fit. I think that's part of the work that we do at Project Equity is to really dig in, and uh, see if the way it's operated historically can carry forward in a worker-owned model, whether that be co-op, ESOP, employee ownership trust. So I know that's a little bit of a non-answer, Chris, but it depends.
I mean, I've honestly thought about this a little bit in the context of like these creator co-ops that we're talking about, where so much of the value is in the people and their ideas and the work that they can do. And we started off this conversation of talking about like creative co-ops in the context of them rising now, and to some extent, I think it is like a lot of the capital intensive parts of running a media company, like having a bunch of printing presses and owning a bunch of distribution, those have gone away, and that might be part of the reason we are able to do what we do without a lot of capital now. That companies like ours can sort of outsource some of that stuff or buy it as we scale, and instead we can put most of our focus on the workers. So.
I mean, I'm struck by the idea that it's a well-known saying in investment banking that all of your assets walk out the door at the end of the night, and that is
Sure.
very much how I feel about running a digital media company. So just from that point of view, you sort of can have that sense of camaraderie. I think even if you don't end up being a worker cooperative, which again, it's been very fascinating to listen to Evan and Michelle, because there are like, our Defector model was just a model that we sort of decided on, of like, these are what we want to accomplish, but it doesn't necessarily fit into what other people are doing. And one thing that I often say is just businesses are so much more flexible than like almost every way that a business runs is just about norms and just sort of an orthodoxy. And so you wanted to adopt something that gives people more of a voice, less of a hierarchy, more visibility, more transparency. There's no actual reason why many of these things couldn't just be adopted, even if the capital structure and the ownership structure didn't follow immediately.
That's a good point. And I think it is a point that we should close on, because I know we are just about at time. Before we go, I do want to thank Evan, Jasper, and Michelle. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. best of luck in all your corporate endeavors. And I believe this stream is going to stay up for whoever wants to check it out later, if you've joined us later in midway through. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.